From the towering spires of Sharn to the rolling Talenta plains, the draconic prophecy has woven itself into the very citizens of the people of Khorvaire.
These dragon-marked houses have integrated themselves into the industry, commerce, and everyday lives of every citizen of Eberron.
I'm RJ.
And I'm Emme.
This is the Adventurers Pack, and today we're talking about the Dragonmarked Houses in Eberron rising from the last war.
So the Dragonmarked Houses, there are 12 of them that officially exist, and they are hereditary houses. They walk a complicated line. They can't hold official nobility titles, they can't own land, but they almost monopolize vast swaths of the industries of Eberron, which as a magically technological world are very important.
They also provide a really fun and interesting way to personalize your character that you bring to the table. Dragonmarks present themselves not quite as birthmarks, but not quite tattoos. They're natural, and they embellish, and they become more powerful as the character ages.
In the more nuts and bolts technical sense, what they are is a greater part of the world. So throughout Eberron, there is a draconic prophecy left behind by the dragons that birthed the world, and they appear on all parts of nature and on the people itself.
I think that makes for really cool, unique backstories for a person to build a character from. Each house has its role in society. It has its professions and its talents and its flaws as well. And it provides a really great building block for me as a player to come up with a fun character to play.
Exactly. I know we were talking about how this really builds you into a society, that you have a job, you have a profession, you have a family. The other thing that's very specific about every house is, with only one exception, your race is completely dictated. So when you choose at character creation, if you're going to have a dragon mark, except for one house which has 2 races, you are one specific race. Everyone else in that house is one specific race. So it is either a variant race or a sub-race.
So with that, let's dive into these houses.
The first house listed in this book is House Medani, given the Mark of Detection.
It's a primarily half-elven house with their headquarters located in the Tower of Inquisition in Breland. I think it's really interesting that this first house in the book is a half-elf house, which is actually pretty rare on the continent of Khorvaire.
Yeah, half-elves themselves are still not a super common race, and there are a couple of half-elf houses, and that's very interesting to me, considering the way that half-elves interact with the world, and considering how specific people with dragon marks are with who they are allowed to marry, who they are allowed to have children with, because interaction between dragon marks is bad, and we'll get into that a little bit more later, but having a house that entirely consists of people who are of a mixed race is just, it's interesting.
Yeah, I definitely see how it fits with their profession. They are the bodyguards, they are the inquisitors, they are the protection agents of certain noble families, or of certain royalty, of politicians, or for just those enough wealthy to hire them. I would think, as from somebody who was, playing this character, you want a team of bodyguards to be very close-knit. So having that uniformity, that synchronicity that I think the half-elf race can bring to the table is perfectly set up for this house.
I completely agree. Half-elves are pillars of the community, and House Medani is absolutely that way. They're very much a part of where they are. They're a part of Breland very deeply, and they work a lot with law enforcement. I can't help but imagine them almost as kind of like gentlemen spies, which again also works very well with the half-elf tropes that we see a lot, where they can kind of exist anywhere and be all of your friends, but also still know so much. And
from a campaign perspective, I personally think I would expect to encounter a lot of House Medani agents throughout the world, whether or not they are in alongside the character that I'm playing as a party member, or as a group of NPCs that I would have to interact with or negotiate with, or maybe even overcome.
This is very true. I mean, as much as these guys, the way they operate within Eberron, most houses try to present themselves with at least a modicum of decency, and House Medani absolutely does that. But there's always kind of a darker side, which is the fun thing about this world.
I would be very curious to see what a chaotic neutral or chaotic good person in House Medani how that would play out at the table, because they are supposed to be the protectors. They're supposed to be the characters who are there looking for wrongdoers and for detecting a poisoned meal or a somebody who's trying to infiltrate the security system. But what if that person has a grudge or has some sort of axe to grind with one of their higher ups or one of their coworkers? What's going to happen in that situation?
Yeah, and what about the person they're guarding? At some point, they aren't responsible for the ethics of the person they're guarding. They're just responsible for keeping them from harm. Mm-hmm. So this is an important line that they walk all day, every day.
Yeah. The next house is going to be House Tharashk, which bears the mark of finding. They are your inquisitors, your bodyguards, even some mercenaries occasionally. They are a multi-race house.
The only one, actually, in here. They have humans and, for the first time, half-orcs.
Gotta show some half-orc love there.
Yeah, they're joining the party. This is the newest house in the world of Eberron, so they're still a little new to the customs and still bucket a little bit. These guys are actually not run by one person, but three in a triumvirate.
Yeah, they actually also are the only house that has divvied themselves up into further clans. So not only within House Tharashk, you're going to have persons who align themselves with a clan. And oftentimes, what I found in looking through the greater lore of Eberron is that sometimes the clan name supersedes the house name. So you have really interesting possibilities for relations with other characters in the world that you're running into.
This is very true. I know to go on that a little bit more, it's traditional when your mark appears and you join a house formally to take the house as your last name. And in House Tharashk, it's more common that you'll actually keep your clan name. And they are a little more working class. They're a little bit more buck the system, and they work a lot when something's gone wrong, when someone skipped town, when someone's stolen something of yours. These are the guys you call. And I know you know a little bit more about this, that they're also prospectors now these days.
So one of the cool things about Eberron and about the world that's been created for us to play in is the discovery and the location of certain items called dragon shards. These are magical crystals that appear throughout the world. They're extremely rare, but when found and when utilized, they actually enhance the power of an individual's dragon mark. How and when that goes about, we don't quite know yet. There's still very little evidence of people actually recovering one of these and interacting it, but imagination run wild. It can run wild. Also, one thing that was really interesting to find is that certain dragon shard pieces are actually very integral into the running of the lightning rail. One of the most prominent features of technology in Eberron relies heavily on these. So you can imagine if anything goes wrong, if any of these shards need to be replaced, the Tharashk group are the ones who know the most about it.
And that actually brings up another point, and we'll talk a little bit more about the house that runs lightning rails later too, but House Tharashk has a lot of interaction with other houses. They interact a lot with Medani. They're kind of like the field work of House Medani. Medani is there to prevent something from going wrong. If something has gone wrong, these are the guys you call. And I think that's really fun as a young house, as a house that has humans and half-orcs in it. That's not really as upper class as the rest of the houses, and having to interact with everybody else in this world so much could lead to a lot of fun tension.
I agree.
House Vadalis, gifted with the Mark of Handling.
It's a human house. and they speak to and they work on animal husbandry, breeding, the training, and the location of exotic beasts throughout Eberron. And they even dabble a little bit in mage breeding and expanding and pushing the limits of what certain beasts can do, or what type of things can be discovered through nature. It's interesting.
It's very fascinating. I mean, they're responsible for a lot, from the mundane nature of farming. Most farms or animal husbandry, like you were saying, are going to be run through them, straight up to if a noble wants to keep a very exotic monster as a pet. These would be the guys you'd call. What I think is really interesting about this book is that it took what, on the surface, if you just went, this is a house that lets you talk to animals better, you'd be like, wow, what a nice house. They're just all cute and fuzzy, and I bet they're just covered in birds all dang day. And took it to a kind of a dark place, which is really cool. Again, it speaks to the nature of Eberron.
It kind of took the trope of Dr. Dolittle and kind of turned it into something a little darker overall, I think, and that has to do with the pulp fiction, with the noir essence that Eberron's going for. I very much could see myself playing a character either working for one of these researchers, trying to crossbreed certain species, and thus having to deal with the everyday tasks and tribulations that might come from that. I also could see myself as an adventurer with my party having to track down a lost animal that's gotten loose, or that is wreaking havoc throughout Sharn. I think this would be a really cool house to start building a character around.
Just remember, kids, don't cross owls and bears.
Alright, the next house is House Jorasco. They bear the Mark of Healing, and they're primarily a halfling house, which is really interesting.
Again, it's the same thing. Eberron takes all these things that might seem kind of sweet and just twist it on their head. They're halflings. They're responsible for hospitals and centers of healing, and in the last war saved countless lives for a price. They are kind of cutthroat with that. They have the power of life and death in their hands, and they know it's important. Yeah, something that's really interesting with this being almost a sub-race, you get access, to certain healing spells and to, knowledge of herbalism or of alchemy. You can take, an alchemist profession and turn it into something that is imbued within your body. When first reading through this house, I was like, oh my god, this is the perfect house for clerics. Well, not necessarily, because this power doesn't come from a divine source, it comes from within. So it allows players to explore that role of the party's healer, or of a person who, has established themselves in a society or a village as the town's healer, but doesn't have to come from a divine. It can come from more of a sorcerer's origins, as we were talking about with some other houses. I think this is a really good point to kind of bring this up, because this is the first house where we're starting to get spells that aren't necessarily super duper arcane. We saw a little bit in handling as well, but this is a place where you can really see that Dragonmarks behave uniquely. They allow you access to magic from all across all kinds of domains. They're a part of you, and it really makes for a unique role-playing situation. I also think, too, different Dragonmarks... I also think different House Jorasco persons, depending on where they are in Corvair, could specialize in different fields. Someone in Sharn of a House Jorasco is going to see very different injuries or medicinal needs than somebody outside of the city, somebody who lives primarily in the woods or along the coast. I think it provides a lot of opportunity for variance and for roleplay, for whatever you want to do. Oh yeah, absolutely. And I'm just thinking about how handy it is if you're a fighter and you can just heal yourself. So options are endless here. Next on the list is House Ghallanda, and they bear, this might weirdly be my favorite mark. It's the Mark of Hospitality. I love how, like you were talking about life beyond the mundane, how normal this one seems. It's a halfling house. They primarily run inns, taverns, restaurants, and they specialize in friendship and maybe secrets, but mostly favors. Yeah, I think it's also
really interesting. I remember seeing a crest or some art of this house being a blink dog. It's there when you need them, and also there to lift you up and brighten your spirits. As somebody who works in the hospitality industry, this house just calls to me. Like, it's so interesting how the innkeepers and the bartenders and the serving people at an everyday inn that you might encounter in a D&D world are overlooked, and now they're pushed to the forefront. Like, when I first read this house, I thought to myself, okay, this is a chance for, like, let's say we're in Lord of the Rings and we're at the Prancing Pony, but instead of following the main group of the Lord of the Rings story, we stay at the Prancing Pony and get to see all of the people who come in and out of that establishment and see the people who run it. We get to peek behind the curtain of all the magic that goes into maintaining an inn or maintaining a bar or even a brothel or some sort of business that needs caretaking. It's fascinating.
I agree. And then from the perspective of playing a player who has the mark of hospitality, why aren't you running your own inn? Or have you, I know it's a big deal if you are, if you bear this mark that you want to own your own business, you want to have your own place. It's a part of what's expected of you. But why aren't you there? Why aren't you doing that? What has befallen upon your life that you're not doing that right now? And how can you be the best bard that you can be? I mean, I know you've got options galore with this house, but come on.
I could very much see a group of friends sitting down to play, picking House Jorasco for all their players, maybe incorporating some Acquisitions Incorporated roles. So not only just barkeeper or or bard or entertainer, but like person who has to keep the books for the inn, and maybe less of an adventuring party game session, but more of just like a social role play, and see what happens when somebody wants to play a prank on maybe the cook. And have fun with that way. I think that'd be a really fun session. Our next house, probably the most important house to the development of Eberron, is going to be House Cannith. Predominantly human house. They bear the mark of making. They're responsible for all of the technology that exists in Eberron. It's fascinating.
Absolutely. They are a house that you would interact with almost on a daily basis just because everything was made from them. Other houses may have a monopoly on the lightning rail or on airships, but House Cannith made all of them. And they're also really important within this book because they're a great place to interact with some new content here. Immediately, we look at the Artificer. If you have the mark of making, there's a good chance you're an Artificer because creation is literally in your blood, and then they're also responsible for the Warforged.
Yeah, so House Cannith has a deep history going back many editions regarding the Last War and the creation of the Warforged as soldiers for the Last War. And then it was at the very end of that war with the Treaty of Thronehold where Warforged were deemed to no longer be needed, and they were therefore allowed to be persons and to be citizens of Corvair and exist and behave as such. And it's just awesome because no longer does a machine for war need to be utilized. It can then go on and live its life. Another really important part of the Treaty of Thronehold was the fact that House Cannith is actually no longer allowed to make any more Warforged automatons, which I think provides a really great opportunity to explore persons who are of that house who had a part in the war. Are they going to be respectful of that treaty? Are they going to want to ignore it? What do you think?
I think that definitely leads again to my buzzword for Eberron, which is intrigue. And there's a lot of that going on in this house because their main headquarters were actually destroyed in the morning. So they've been split pretty much in three pieces, really. You can't really say twain. It's three. Thrain. But each of the leaders has a different specialty, and one of them does specialize in Warforged. Time remains to see how much they're going to be respectful of all of that.
I think if you are a player who likes puzzle solving, who likes being the group's, who likes being your party's detective or problem solver, then I think this is going to be a great house for you to pick because it provides opportunities for you to not only create something much like the Artificer does, but also to to kind of tinker a little bit and kind of mess around with any type of problem that comes along.
You could absolutely look at rogues, wizards, any of those classes could fit very well in this house as well. So next is House Orien. They bear the Mark of Passage. And this is a very interesting house because they're going through a lot of changes right now. They are responsible for the lightning rail, which is a major mode of transportation, but they've been running into some problems with that because a lot of roads for that were destroyed during the last war. All the roads that go through the Mournlands have been destroyed. So they're having some tricky time with their industry right now.
Yeah, it's more... This house predominantly focuses on maintaining and operating modes of transportation throughout Eberron. We just talked about House Cannith and how they were developing the tech. These are the persons who oversee the day-to-day operations. These are going to be your conductors and your mechanics who are going to be on board certain ships or lightning rail cars to oversee the passengers safely. As a quick note, not all lightning rail cars but some are actually powered by dragon shards. So as mentioned before, these are artifacts and magical items that are very important to the operations of the technology in this world, and should anything happen to them, events will follow.
Absolutely. And at higher levels, they, if you are a spellcaster, you can access teleportation magic. So you've got your Misty Step, your teleportation, circle, your jump, things of that nature. And I know it mentioned in this book that they're actually working with House Cannith to try and expand on that.
Something that's really cool I read in other source materials is that they actually have a group of this house who are called the Trailblazers. They are responsible for exploring new routes for the lightning rail and even discovering new parts of Corvair that we haven't discovered before. So if you're a ranger who wants to venture into uncharted territory, this is going to be the house for you. House Sivis, the next house on our list, is a gnome house. They bear the Mark of Scribing. They are going to be your lawmakers, your politicians, your orators. Such a fun house to play.
This is again another one of those moments where Eberron takes it and flips it on its head. These are the cutthroat, all neutral, meticulous party of arbitrating differences and sending messages across great spans of the nation, and they're gnomes. It's just so fun to make this very detail-oriented house. I mean, it makes sense because gnomes are inquisitive, they're knowledgeable minds, but it's also kind of hilarious when you think of lawyer, you don't exactly think gnome.
I think this is definitely a house where, like, if there ever a stock market in D&D, House Sivis would be the ones in charge of keeping track of who has how many shares of what business or of what trade. I think it would be super fun if you like keeping tables and if you like keeping ledgers as a player. You're gonna have a ton of fun with this one.
This is also a house that you're gonna interact with a lot on a day-to-day basis because not only are they keeping track of libraries, laws, paperwork, they're also keeping track of getting things across distances. So they make sending stones and they keep message stations all across the continent. So they're vital to the day-to-day operations of the world.
Yeah, I could totally see a plot hook as a party member where some noble or some person of importance has a will, and they want to ensure that their will is not tampered with, and that the things that they leave to their loved ones are enacted out. And I could totally see somebody from House Sivis playing into that party, and who knows what's going to happen with that. Really cool.
Next, House Deneith with the Mark of the Sentinel. Arguably, again, an incredibly important house, an incredibly powerful house with a lot of kind of dark politics. We've got a human house going on, and they are primarily mercenaries and bodyguards. So they have a very large military force, and they existed in the war, but like all houses, maintained an aspect of neutrality, which can be seen as kind of good and bad. They want to say that they were there for everybody, but it also kind of meant they were up for bid.
Yeah, I think this is definitely one of the more cut and dry houses. If you want to play a fighter, a barbarian, or a paladin, somebody who really likes to use their brawn before their brain, this is going to be an opportunity for you to play those characters. I think in terms of roleplay, it might be fun to try and find a character who not only is skilled as a fighter, but maybe has done something in the past that they aren't really as proud of anymore, and they're struggling to maintain that outer shell, that outer strength, but is internally struggling.
I think that's a micro version of what it's going through as a house itself. I know it says here in this book that there are even people who kind of want to see them maybe take over a little bit as well.
Interesting.
And that's such a dark place because the houses have never held any true control over the government. They might wield a lot of influence, but after the war there's still some kind of vacuums, and they've done some things they're not proud of, but should they take these reins? Should they not? Again, it's in a really weird place. They've got a lot of competition with newer houses like Tharashk. But this is, again, somebody you're going to interact with a lot. If you're walking past a guard outside the palace, it's probably one of these guys.
So our next house is actually a 2-for-1. It's the Mark of Shadow, which is present on both members of House Phiarlan and House Thuranni. Both houses specialize in actors and bards and entertainers and performers. Really, they're spies.
Yeah. And it looks like they had a pretty major schism at the end of the last war. The details are shadowy. But it seems that there was a disagreement over what direction the house should go into. And so it's House Phiarlan that is doing more spy work.
Yes.
And it's House Thuranni that has kind of deviated into doing some assassination work. So there used to be another mark that has been wiped out. It was the Mark of Death that seemed to be doing a lot of that work. And House Thuranni seems to be filling that kind of niche void.
Yeah, this is definitely the house for espionage. If you want to build a campaign or you want to build a story around double agents and backstabbing and two-faced characters, if you want your party to always be questioning whose side is this person on, this is the house for you.
And this is also the oldest house that at least I can see in here. Internet, correct me on this one if I am wrong, but it is incredibly old. This is our only elf house, our only true and pure elf house. And the people who carry this mark, the people who've had this mark, have had it for thousands of years. Its traditions are cemented and in place, and as much as there's a lot of duplicity, there's also tradition. House Lyrandar, with the Mark of Storms, is an incredibly influential house in that they run the air and the sea. So they have any sea galleon is probably piloted by them, but more importantly recently has been, over the last decade, the development of airships, which have to have a Lyrandar pilot, which means that they're incredibly vital and also providing a lot of competition for some other houses like House Orien.
If any of your storylines take you onto an airship or onto one of these sea vessels, do your best to keep the pilot safe, because
some of them can't be flown without them.
Yeah, you're gonna go down with the ship, undoubtedly. One thing I think that's also really fun to experiment with in terms of a storyline is how House Lyrandar can affect the growing of crops and supplies and the food sources for a lot of these cities around Corvair. I can totally imagine a world where somebody gets bribed to, deny an area some rain for a few days, or deny their plants sun needed to produce the vegetables to sustain their people. Like, I think it's one of those things could it's not the obvious big bad, but it could be detrimental to an entire village.
Without a doubt. Going back, this is the half-elf house. So you're right, these are people who work with everyone, but also in that could deny work to others. And they're in between a lot of worlds, and you're going to interact with them with a lot of different houses, because like House Cannith and things like that, they're where they can go, they're very vital, and they kind of have choices of who they want to be with.
House Kundarak is up next, a pretty straightforward house. It's the Dwarven house in Eberron, and they bear the mark of warding. These are going to be your bankers, your vault makers, and your security personnel around any type of establishment that has something it needs protecting.
This is, I think, for the first time in all the houses, something it's really on the nose. Of course you would want to trust dwarves with this kinds of stuff. If you're working with money or anything important, you're going to interact with these guys. Something else that I think is a little bit fun is that they also kind of know how to break the locks. Now, it's considered rude for them to go against their own people. It is bad taste, but I don't know that they would feel that way necessarily about a rival's locks. And I know you were very interested in their extra dimensional doors.
I've never played a rogue before, so I've never personally had a hand in rolling to pick a lock, but just the concept of an interdimensional vault where your door is located in a room, but the contents inside of it are not even on this plane. Like, what happens if something goes wrong between the two? Like, everything is lost. Can it be found again? Oh, man.
We got options. The last big thing on our to-do list that we wanted to talk about is, honestly, in my dark little heart, one of my favorite things in here is the Aberrant Dragonmark. So this is a feat that you can take. You can be any race, any class. The only prerequisite is that you have no other Dragonmark. What happens at that point is you manifest one, and it comes with a price. So Aberrant Dragonmarks are any Dragonmark that doesn't conform to what's been studied and what's known. The houses are all very predictable. All the powers are very predictable. They've got it down. They know what it's going to be like when you grow up. But with an Aberrant Dragonmark, it's most often caused by when two people of different houses have a kid, which is super forbidden for this exact reason. And it manifests itself in kind of a dark way. There's a price.
Yeah, this sounds like nothing else in the Eberron book that we've encountered before. I think it provides a lot of opportunity for characters that are gonna have a chip on their shoulder, and characters who might even, want to seek out an evil character. Players who want to seek out an evil character. I totally see this as a revenge story being told right away. Potentially.
This is also something that, since it happens to you, if this happens to your character, I mean, that's a emotional turmoil. This is something that is kind of destroying you. It has the potential to heal you. It also has the potential to deal damage to the people around you. It's chaotic and wild and uncontrolled. And yeah, if you're looking at evil characters, I can absolutely see this crawling around on a villain. There's a reason that these things are strictly enforced and are not supposed to happen, but sometimes they just do, and that breathes into the chaotic nature of the Draconic prophecy.
It's very interesting to me. If I were in a campaign and I came across a character who was an aberrant, had an Aberrant Dragonmark, I would wonder how many other Aberrant Dragonmarks are there? Do they have any type of connection with each other? Is there some sort of secret brotherhood or union of these people who have this one thing in common? What's going to happen? And there we are! All of the Dragonmarked houses that were given to us in the Eberron Rising from the Last War book. Fascinating stuff. I am so excited to build a character from one of these houses.
I think it's just such an interesting addition to character development. It adds something that really interlaces you into the world. It gives you background, it gives you a job, it gives you a family. It really makes this world feel fleshed out and unique and real.
Yeah, I can tell that while they were designing this book, they really wanted to emphasize the backgrounds in the player's handbook that might not get a lot of time in the sun. I've definitely sat down and played characters who are, your folk heroes, or your hermits, or your outlanders, your sailors. Those, I feel like, get a lot of attention. They're the classic heroic D&D characters that we love to play, that we see, played out for us. But we don't often see somebody who comes to the table bringing a cobbler, or a pastry baker, who has discovered something magical about themselves, or who was born with something magical about themselves. And these houses give you that. They give you the context you need. They give you the enemies you might encounter from other houses along the way. They give you the part of the world that you might thrive on. It's just amazing, the malleability that you get with it.
There's also some fun options that we haven't even gone into, which is you've manifested one of these marks and you don't belong to the house for whatever reason. Maybe you did and you had a falling out, or maybe you're a war orphan and this has happened to you, but you have no context for what it means or what this house is like. Who might be interested in that? Who might be interested in harming you because of that? There's a lot of politics inherent in your existence.
Yeah, one of the best things I think that this brings to the world of Eberron is it feeds well into the noir and the fantasy and the mixing of genres that we love to do as D&D players. You've got just so many story points can be generated from these Dragonmarked houses. We talked a lot about them in depth. What would you say is your favorite?
Sorry, I still gotta go with the Mark of Hospitality. I mean, I know it's just goofy and weird. It's so not necessarily what you would expect from a heroic landscape, but you know everybody, you've talked to everybody. It's such an unusual way of doing commerce, and it's very Casablanca. I mean, come on.
Totally.
How about you?
I'm a little torn. I gotta say, I really do enjoy playing in the space of House, the Mark of Warding, the locksmiths and the bankers, somebody who's responsible for making a vault. That to me sounds awesome. I would love to play around with that. But I'm also, I'm gonna, I think, maybe dabble a little bit in the Mark of Handling, the animal handlers, the beast capturers, the mage breeders. What is gonna go through your mind to think,
yeah, you got a lot of options with that house, and how are you going to use your powers for good or for ill? Like, there's a lot of places to go from there, that's for sure.
I cannot wait to start escaping.
Absolutely. Well, I think that kind of sums it up from there. What's your favorite house? Please tell us down below in the comments. We'd really like to talk to you about it. We'll talk to you about it for hours, obviously.
If you just want to click this button to subscribe.
And this button here to watch more videos.
See ya!